Happy Saturday, everyone. I have Preet Wilson in my bubble for this week to share kind of how she came to her views and what her views are. And Preet's an active member in the Great Debate community within the Christian group, and sorry, I got caught by the thing I always get caught by. So anyway, and I talk about it every time I do a hangout, where you get the stream going, and it doesn't matter. No matter how hard I try not to be distracted by it, I get distracted, and it's the fact of life now. But you're active in a lot of the Christian discussions. I see you obviously engaged with Calvinists. Exchanging thoughts there, and I'm interested in getting into that. But I was just commenting on how much I like your haircut, because my daughter has a similar haircut. And you were mentioning that it's part of the reason why you're a little hesitant to go on camera.
I usually don't get on cam is because I've gotten comments from putting up my picture on my profile from a couple of Christians, mostly men, not women, mostly men, that why do you have your head shaved and all that. And I think it's the more extreme population that usually will say something. So I don't get on cam. I don't want people to say something and then I get frustrated.
Yeah, when I was saying that the church that I went to is very tight when I was in college, and my wife was and I were doing a lot of outreach to students, and I was a student myself. She had already graduated. She's 5 years older than me, so she had already graduated and was returning to school to actually further her education, but she actually saw it as her calling was to minister to students, and she thought being there would facilitate that. And actually, when I was trying to save money, so I'd cut my own hair, and I actually goofed up one time with the razor. And so then I decided, since I'd messed it up, I was just going to go ahead and white wall the whole thing. So I had shaved and then had a flop top on top, and actually got rebuked by one of the missionaries there, who came down on me for trying to stand out. And my wife actually came to my defense and was like, she wasn't my wife at the time, but she was my friend, and said, told her privately that I was trying to save money and I just goofed up, and but still so superficial. So I understand if it's something that you don't want to get in the way of people hearing the things you have to say, like if it's something that inhibits that you'd want to not put that stumbling block, as it were, in the way.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually great. I think it's I think it kind of be something that shouldn't be an issue, honestly. So cheers to you. So but thank you for coming on camera here. So that's quite a treat. I think you're one of a couple of people who have chosen to debut their camera their camera app.
First time. Yep. I was like,
cool.
I'm gonna do it.
I had another question for you, because actually I'm just going to take advantage here.
Sure.
So are you Irish? Is that what?
No.
Where do you? Okay, you're not. You're what are you?
I'm originally from India.
Oh, okay.
And I came here to the States in 1998.
Wow, it's so funny how preconceived, you build up I think I had a notion of you being in Britain or something. I think maybe because of your accent, or I'm just terrible reading that. I didn't even know you were in the States. That's wild.
Yeah, no, I'm in the States.
Did you grow up in the States, or what age did you come over?
I was about almost, I believe, somewhere between 10 and 11.
Okay. And you're, I guess we can just jump into kind of, if you're comfortable talking about your background a little bit. Did you, were you raised in a Christian family, or did you come to it later?
I came to it way later. I didn't come to Christianity till I was almost 22.
Oh, wow. And what was your family was Hindu, or
They
they not
were
anything?
they were we were in the northern end of India, so that's where you would find like Pakistan is like right next to us.
Hmm.
Um, I grew up in a Sikh family,
Hmm.
which is a monotheistic religion, but it has like hints of Hinduism, kind of Islam and Hinduism kind of mixed in.
Interesting.
Weird. But it is a monotheistic religion, as in they only believe that there is one supreme being.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I don't know much about that at all. The Were your parents, was it, how much of that was a part of your life, I guess? How much of that faith was active? Are they are they casual Sikhs? Is there such a notion as a casual Sikh?
I think they were casual Sikhs. Faith really wasn't a big part at all, really, growing up. Just going to the temple every Sunday. That's about it. But other than that, me personally, I never really. Um, it wasn't a thought.
Hmm. Um, and so, were you in college then when you said 22 when you became a Christian?
Yes. So that's an interesting story. Um, so I came here in 1998. I went to high school here, and pretty much in high school, I would say I was an atheist. I didn't really believe in God, or it wasn't really a thought in my mind. It wasn't until I was I'm a very I used to be, not so much anymore, heavy into video gaming,
Hmm.
and I met my now husband playing a game, and he was in New York at that time, and he is actually a Christian,
Hmm.
and through him is how I ended up coming to faith.
Wow, interesting. Was it
I was in California
okay? And
when I met him.
you met him at a games convention, or you met
No,
him
I
through?
met him online gaming,
Oh, okay.
and I was getting ready to move to a four-year university, and he's like, "Oh, what about coming out here?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'll apply." But my parents find out that I had been talking to him, and he's white. They didn't approve, and
Really?
yeah, my parents disowned me. I haven't seen them ever since I left in 2008.
Wow. Wow. In 2008. Wow. I'm sorry about
Yeah,
that. And that was because he was white, not because he was Christian, or
because he was white. He was not Indian.
right? Does that have, being completely naive, does that have impact religiously, or is that a more kind of base racism, would you say?
I would say that I mean, I wouldn't blame it on so much as religion, because this really has to go back to Indian history. The British occupation of
Sure.
India left a very bitter taste. Like, Indian people have a caution when it comes to white people in general, and that's because of that history.
Hmm.
It's just they were so oppressed, and all the stuff that happened, it just left a really bitter taste in their mouth.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I guess I would have potentially seen it being, I mean, given that that was 2008, and you said you came over in 97, was that right?
98.
98. Being in the country for so long, but still having those feelings. I mean, to the point where you would actually not talk. Um, uh,
It does have to do with, I would say that it does have to do with cultural racism, but
Right.
I would say that it really was aggravated because of the history too,
Hmm. Yeah,
because
I
of the
find.
British occupation of India.
Yeah, there's I get startled by that every once in a while. I'll be talking. There's actually a good Korean friend that I work with at DreamWorks. And she doesn't work there anymore, but a couple of years ago, she surprised me when I was in conversation with her, and then she made a really derogatory remark about Japanese, and it was actually something that was from she got from her parents and had a view that I hadn't heard articulated by anyone. But it's a lot of there's a lot of deep. Um, channels, I guess, of anger and
Yeah.
hatred and bias. And she's, I mean, she's not, she was, I think she's younger than me, or she's at least the same age as me. And so I wouldn't have anticipated that that would be there for events that that happened prior, but it's
Mhm.
just so ingrained in the culture.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was bitter when it first happened. Like it had gotten really bad to the point that they didn't want me talking to him, and the house was like, my parents were never abusive. I can't say that at all. My Indian parents coddle their children like we're very sheltered. So my parents were not at all abusive or anything like that. I wouldn't suggest that. I was raised very luxuriously, and I was pampered. But just when that happened, um, my father and I were really close. More so with my mom, that I was shocked that dad would be willing to throw away the relationship we had over this. I was
Yeah,
shocked.
I guess if the if they were going to feel betrayed, it would almost probably make it magnified or something, right? That I don't know. Yeah, it's
Yep.
hard to understand those things when you don't, when it seems so. I could never imagine doing that, and so it's really hard to imagine what must be going through one's mind when they're doing that. But that's that. So, how did that have any impact on when? I'm not sure when. In regards to when you met him, when did you become a Christian from that, or when did you identify yourself as a Christian after meeting him? And
Uh,
did those events with your family have any bearing on that? Did it um, would you say?
um, I think they did, because what happened was, um, before I came here to New York, after I had gotten accepted into one of the really nice universities here, because I'm in nursing. Um, he had spoken about Christianity, and I really didn't want to hear about it, because I've had run-ins with Christians prior where, like, oh, you're going to hell, like that those are the only run-ins I had. I remember I thought they were Christians. I didn't know until later that the guys who go door to door are actually Mormons. um, my mom, yeah, my mom
Wait, so
opened.
you're saying Mormons aren't Christians then? Is that what you're saying?
I thought they were Christians because they were talking about like, oh, do you know Christ? And um, I remember my mom had a run-in with a couple of them where mom had opened the door and they were starting to talk to her about like hell and whatnot, and I was home, and I happened to catch that. I was like, you know what, get out of here. And like that's like the only really interaction I've had with Christianity prior to this, and I really didn't want anything to do with it.
Um, so before we get too far off of it, what games were you playing that you were active in?
I was playing Warhawk at that time. It was on the
PS3 or PS2?
PS3,
Yeah, yeah.
PS3. It's kind of like Call of Duty. but it's an online MMO. It's like massive multiplayer. Like we had clans and raids and whatnot. I was into that kind of.
That was that the one that you built? There's a little bit like a tower defense as well, where you actually like built. You had flying, right? You had,
yes.
And then you had. Did you have ground unit like fortifications you could build and things like that? Yeah. Okay.
It's like 2 teams. Usually, you start out at your base. You got to protect your base, but you got to capture as many flags of the other team. So that's how I met him playing that.
That's funny. I don't meet a lot of people who played Warhawk. I didn't know how big that community got. It looked like a great game at the time, but I had a PS3. I'm always been a PlayStation owner, and
I think as soon as I came here in 2008, that's really kind of when it like just started dying.
Oh, the Warhawk as a gaming community or whatever.
Yeah. Prior to that, for like 2-3 years, it was really big.
Yeah. I was always for like 10 years I played World of Warcraft, and we actually had a DreamWorks guild, and nice. Tuesday and Thursday nights, actually all 4 CG supervisors were either the guild leader or guild officers in the guild, and we would go home, and we were one of the best rating for 2 expansions. We were one of the best rating guilds on our servers, but we would literally work on How to Train Your Dragon and rush home on Tuesdays and Thursdays to neglect our families for 3 to 4 hours at a time.
It was fun. That game was really fun.
Yeah, we were pretty deep into it. And I think there's still people who play, but do you still play games?
I'm also a Final Fantasy fan.
Oh yeah.
The latest one that I've played is Final Fantasy 14, I believe. Realm Reborn. I don't know if you've heard about it. That's the latest one I played, but I really haven't been doing it a whole lot now.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that I always joke that when I came to Google Plus, it felt a lot like the WoW forums and guild chat and whatnot.
WoW is a game that I didn't touch. That game, it looked like it was fun. A lot of people on it.
It was extremely addictive. But the thing is that drama and all of the interactions. It's funny when I came to Google Plus that it has a lot of those same qualities. It's just about these very personal issues, but it ends up being about these little debates and these little skirmishes and people calling out other people and things like that. It reads just like all of that. And it's funny how many people actually are in the community who had that background. And so I'm wondering how many people like actually just left into Google Plus or other social networking sites and found it as a something to replace that other social experience that they were having prior. So, but so at that time, because one thing that I'm sure we'll get into inevitably is talking about Calvinism and your issues with it. Even somebody today posted on that I was hanging out with you. They made some snarky comment about it, and but I've heard you say in the past. I think I heard you say that you were a Calvinist at some point. Is that true?
I was.
And how long? When was that? How long was that? And
now it's been, I think, year and a half.
So like a year and a half ago, you were a Calvinist. That's, given your allergy to it. That's shocking to me how recent that was for you.
Yeah.
Was there let's talk about that in a minute, because what I want to do is I don't want to get too far ahead of when you maybe could you talk a little bit about what so you met your boyfriend, who's if I'm not mistaken is your current husband, right? And what type of church were you going to, and what was maybe even talk about how you, if you don't mind, talk about how you came to belief. Like what was that? Yeah, what was that experience like for you?
Okay, so I had come here, and I was about to, get all my setup done with the dorm. I was going to go live in the dorm while I was going to school. And my mother and father-in-law at that time had a room open. They're like, you would just, live with us. Why would you go to a dorm, save money? And I was like, that was really nice of them. And I think I had been here for like 3-4 months. And my husband actually, 2 weeks after I had gotten here, ended up proposing to me. So 2 weeks after he saw me in real life, he proposed, and that took me by surprise. And after that, his mother and father-in-law, they are some of the most awesome people I have met. So loving, so caring, and they really have like become my surrogate like parents. They took on, because I was still very young, I needed my parents. And my mother and father-in-law have really loved me so much, and they were very deeply hurt when I first came here to hear what had happened. And so their love, I would say, has been one of the biggest influences in my life. So my mother-in-law had asked me one day, oh, you want to come to church with us after I had been here for a while? I was like, okay, sure. I wasn't going to say no, even though I really wasn't into that. So I went, and that was the first time I've ever stepped foot into a church. And so the pastor's giving the sermon. It's all going over my head. I have no idea what's going on. I'm just sitting there. He was going to be the one who was going to marry us. So she wanted me to, introduce me to the pastor who's going to end up doing our wedding service. And so after the service was over and everything, she took me up to meet him. So we went into his office and introduced me to him. And as soon as he like grabbed my hand, he was like, oh, can I just pray for you? I was like, sure. I'm not going to say no now. And so he started praying for me. He like put his like, I didn't even know actually what he was saying. He put his like hand over my head, and I don't know what I felt. I can't describe it. And all of a sudden he's like, and this is the first time I'm meeting this man. Mm-hmm. And he tells me, he's like, you know what? I just want to let you know. And he like whispered it because he didn't want anybody to hear. But my mother-in-law was like the only person. And then usually if he's praying for somebody, if he has something to say to them, they will usually give privacy, because sometimes, if he's counseling somebody. So it was just me and him, because she had like gone outside. And he like whispered to me, and he's like, God wants me to tell you that depression that you've been struggling with for so many years, he's going to deliver you of that, and he's going to heal you of that. And I honestly can't explain this, but it was like almost like having like 1,000 tons dropped on you, that I like just like my legs like became like jello. Mm-hmm. And I fell down, and I couldn't explain it, and I started crying. And I had a very dramatic conversion.
Sure.
Because it's something I've never felt before. And also the fact that this man, I'm first time meeting him, he knows nothing about my life. And depression was something that I had been battling with for 6-7 years of my life, and it's something that I kept to myself. Mm-hmm. Because in Indian societies, there's still stigma about like psychological disorders and mental disorders, that there's so much stigma to it. I hid it from my parents, that because I actually, my dad actually knew somewhat, but my mom didn't. I knew mom would really make, because I almost committed suicide prior. And
that was, well, sorry, you said prior to meeting your boyfriend?
yes,
But
this,
after, okay. Oh, so but that was still before your parents disowned you then.
yes,
Oh.
this was when I was back in California that I had attempted to kill myself, and I wasn't successful.
Mm-hmm.
That's how my father kind of knew that I
Mm-hmm.
had been seeking help and therapy, and that's why my dad and I were so close, because he would know things that I could share with him that I couldn't really, tell my mom. And so this was something that I had been really, like, I would say depression was my bane.
Hmm.
It really was. And I was actually very nervous, and that's something I was very ashamed of.
Sure.
I hid it from my husband when I didn't tell him. I wasn't going to I didn't really tell anybody. That's why that's the other reason why it was like even more shocking that this pastor
Sure.
would know something like this. Not only because it was so, that was like my, if there was one thing I would wish like would go away was that.
If there's one thing you could wish would go
Would
away.
go away would have
Uh-huh.
been that. So
Sure,
that's
sure.
why I was just taken back, and then that whole, I can't explain it, the physical feeling that I felt on top of that. So it was a very intense conversion.
Yeah, it sounds like it really, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't, a lot of folks don't have this kind of experience. And honestly, I think I would have had to have this kind of an experience in order for me to believe.
yeah,
Um,
I didn't have for myself, and people, depending on your your background, people will completely dismiss anything I say regarding my experience because I no longer, I'm a professing atheist right now.
yeah.
So people are like, well, do you think that's what happened? But that's not what really happened. But for myself, my own experience, it was overnight. It was a, I walked out of a dorm Bible study glowing. Like it changed everything for me. In that moment in there, I was complete. I went in. I wouldn't say not persuaded that Jesus was God and that Jesus died for me. And I don't even think the Bible study wasn't even about um, the the it wasn't an altar call of any sort at all.
Hmm.
It was literally going in and having a discussion about. I unfortunately didn't record, and so I can't remember what the actual passage was, but it was something. I don't think it was John. I think it was probably something in the middle of Luke. Um, but the discussion we had in there, I walked, I walked out of there convinced that God was real, that Jesus was alive and was living in these people, and went back to my dorm room and prayed, and was a change. Like overnight, the next week, people were seeing me, and I had like there were things that weren't even didn't even take effort for me. Like for instance, I had cursed like a sailor, I think before that, and I didn't even try not to curse. I just didn't curse anymore. It just all of a sudden it was gone from those words were gone from my vocabulary, and it wasn't on my mind. It wasn't something that I was like trying to like that I had that no longer wanted to, and then was going like, oh wow, I really almost did there. Like it just didn't come out anymore that way, or I just behaved entirely differently. And it was a very rich experience for me. It was very difficult to articulate because there are a lot of people skeptical, obviously, of a dramatic change like that, right? Like people that
Hmm.
don't experience something like that are very skeptical and very
Yes.
want to um, associate all sorts of. They're going to pick it apart, right? Like there's almost like you can't like that's a phenomenon I have right now as I talk about my former my time my 15 years as a Christian, um, people are Christians who I talk about it with are listening to my words and picking them apart and going, oh, that's it right there. That's the reason why he's no longer, or that, you know, they'll listen to
Yeah.
my story of my conversion and try to identify the things that they feel were ingredient in my not actually being fully converted, even though, you know, for 15 years, I was head over heels 24/7 in it. As much as I'm into anything, I was fully committed to that. So I'm sure that you get that when you talk about your experience like that for you. But for you,
did you
very
feel
real.
anything like physical?
I felt the release and the freedom and the it was like a weight. It was like a huge weight being like alleviated. I felt like I was floating on air all of a sudden, and it was I felt like, this is going to sound completely hokey, but I felt completely clean. Like I felt entirely like I was someone who was soaked in mud, and then all of a sudden just had a fresh shower. You know, I hadn't showered for a year, and then all of a sudden was pristine and completely. It was very liberating, and it was something that honestly, when I became an atheist, it was those things that I couldn't believe were not the case. Like I had understood that to be the case, that I had converted, and that the Holy Spirit had entered me and had started a sanctifying process that day, and that I was in communion with God. I mean, I used to talk to God all the time, and I would pray, and I would. It was a very rich thing for me. It wasn't superficial praying for things or whatever. It was a very deep connection I felt. And so when I started having issues, those were the things that were very. It was hard for me to reconcile things that I had taken a certain way to
would
try
you mind
to
elaborating, like what issues? I am curious to know about your deconversion story.
Sure. It had been I don't know when it started. I don't know what I think it was starting to think about humans and human behavior differently, not in that it sounds like in a very very scientific, like I was sitting there reading, you know, Origin of Species or something, and had like these real struggles. It wasn't like that for me. It was probably conversations I was in. I'm sure it was exposure to having deep conversations with gay Christians who I worked with over years, who were close friends, and we weren't having deep discussions about faith. It was more getting to know them getting to know them as people. In the San Francisco Bay Area, it's a very diverse culture, and so I was having lots of conversations with people from different backgrounds who had very different beliefs, and it was, to some degree, continued exposure to rich. I don't want to say scientific content, but they were things that were interesting to me about biology, about human behavior, about I'm a guy who reads and exposes himself to a lot of things, and I get very interested in topics, and I think just having lots of different things start to change my perspective a little bit on how human behavior operated and how people and how people behave. I think sin was probably the thing that was getting eroded away at. This notion of a singular fall, or a time before sin, or a prior state of a communion that was sinless and from which we had fallen. And I don't know how literal at the end that I actually took that to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was probably a little bit of as I transitioned out, I was probably trying to understand it in different ways. But once I no longer saw a fall even that was part of my the video I did recently. Once I no longer understood a fall or understood it to be a case of sin and merely saw it as behavior, then salvation and a need for a savior went away. And I couldn't reconcile how the very real event of Jesus' death and resurrection to atone for mankind could be something pinned on this kind of vague sin-like fall, or an allegorical Adam and Eve that had spiritual, like I heard it put so many different ways in terms of how this could be understood. I had always taken it with a literal understanding, but then to understand it as a pair of Homo sapiens that had some spiritual understanding, or a group, and that out of behavior rebelled against that or chose a different path from that. I had a hard time taking the very real resurrection and applying it to some vague moment. So I saw the fall as being necessarily this pivotal thing that, and I think Scripture supports that. Sorry, I'm holding a can opener because I'm getting ready to open a can. The very real death and resurrection of Jesus to atone for a very for what people were telling me was kind of this ambiguous event, and I didn't see Scripture as supporting that. I think it's very difficult to take the entire structure. And I've heard Max hangs out. I completely appreciate him, and he articulates it as well as anyone. And I don't find it persuasive. Alternate views on taking Scripture as not having these things are allegorical through, potentially to Abraham, or to that it's not a literal flood, or it's a local flood, or there's a lot of things that I have a hard time like reframing it in that way, because I don't think that that's how they understood it. And so that was sin and behavior became a big part for me. And I've talked about it before, but there was a trial in particular that became the catalyst for this. Is that there was a trial going on for a woman who lived in East Palo Alto who had murdered someone, and reading about her past and reading about the things that motivated her, and she went through, and oddly enough, I ended up on a murder trial recently, probably 3 or 4 years ago, for an LA gang member, and it was much the same kind of situation where just an abusive household, raised in a crime family, had nothing in the way. It felt like a lot of factors contributing to where this person was in that moment. And then I look at my own life, look at where I'm at, and see, and this, oddly enough, this might end up bringing us into determinism, but having a lot of influences that this person didn't have, and just seeing it as different manifestations of behavior based on different influences that culminated in a person acting a certain way. And while we execute justice as a deterrence, but I don't see it that the person is ultimately culpable in the sense that you could eternally punish them with any notion of that being attributable to them. And we can go into talking about this, but all these things were operative in me. And then I think eventually, as I looked into it more, I started looking into Scripture, and I started actually looking into areas that I had just taken for granted regarding, authorship and the quality of the text. And all of a sudden, there's all these other things that I just assumed were solid, and found out that they were a lot less solid than I would have liked that I would have thought. And that was a surprise to me, actually. I don't think the church does a good job of actually educating people, their followers, on that stuff. So for a lot of people, when you bring it up for them, they either deny it out of ignorance, or they go, wow, I didn't know that. I hadn't, I find that hard to believe. But in actuality, there are issues for me. So as as Oswald say, like gospel communicator, right? Like if this is his efforts to communicate, and that resonates with me. That's something that this is an awfully. I want to do a video on this actually, but I feel like when you read about belief and faith in the first century, they're talking about faith and belief that this one man died for, that this God man died for the sins of mankind, and that you can have faith in him and find redemption and atonement for your faults through his perfection and through his perfect sacrifice. And they're not talking about belief in the quality of the text or belief in the dubious authorship or faith in these other things. Like these other issues could be much clearer, right? Like it could have been a much more clear chain of custody for the text, or it could have been a much clearer revelation, so that 2,000 years later, it's not subject to all of these issues. And for me, it's really strange to hear that be like, for me, that's the stumbling block. I've said it before, like I can more readily believe that Jesus died for all of sin, and to atone for man and to redeem man, more readily than I can believe that the Bible is inerrant, or that the Bible is these other things. And so for me, the issues of faith are it's to the text and the accounts themselves, and having to put so much effort into believing them, I could actually believe the resurrection more readily than I could. I wouldn't know how to reconcile the texts based on some of the issues I see. So that's a lot. Did you want to come back at some of that?
No, that's usually, like, I've heard that before. And honestly, I think, see, if you look at just geographically, atheism is a phenomenon of the West. It absolutely is. You don't see it in the East. This is why, like, when I was looking, after I had finally come to Christ, and that was in a Pentecostal church. That was a Pentecostal preacher, pastor, but he was awesome. He is such a sweet man, awesome guy. We'll always love him. But after that, I was looking for, how to learn more about the faith and whatnot. That's how I eventually, veered into Calvinism. And I was a Calvinist for, like, I would say nearly 2 to 3 years, until cognitive dissonance. Just going back, so after I had my, that experience, after I had come here, I was actually really worried, and I had a lot of anxiety because I didn't have health insurance. I didn't know how I was going to get my meds that I was on. But lo and behold, I came off the meds in about 2 months and haven't been on any meds since. And I'm actually shocked. I really, like, when I look back at that.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. I am really shocked because I've contemplated suicide many times. I even attempted it, almost getting close. So I honestly can't believe sometimes that I'm sitting here, that I don't struggle with that anymore. And there's been other things after that. But after I started studying Calvinism, it's very easy to become a Calvinist. It's very easy, just the way the theology is given to you and whatnot. But when others start pointing out the issues with it, like my mother and father-in-law, when I was, kind of, when you first become a Calvinist, it's like, oh my God, nobody knows about this. I got to tell everybody about it. You have this hate stage.
You tick off everybody.
Cage stage is a real thing. It's really real. You want to tell everybody that nobody believes this? How come nobody believes this?
Right.
So I was having conversations with my mother and father-in-law who have been Christians for a very long time. And when I was having conversations with them and they were looking at me, they're like that's not the God we know. And I was like, well, why not? And they started pointing out all these things that I really hadn't thought about. And then other people started pointing out things. And I really started to like just think deeply about it to where like I had like a nervous breakdown. And I started having...
Can I
Sure.
back you up just a second before we get to that? So you had your conversion at this charismatic church, and then were you? I'm sorry, and when you asked me about that thing, I then went off for a long time and we got off topic.
That's okay.
But I was curious. Did you start going to church right away, immediately after that? And then
No.
how did Calvinism then, like, when you did start going to church, was it that you were reading other things, and like, how did you come to a Calvinist perspective?
Well, after I had that experience, I didn't start going to church right away. No, that it's been, for me, I'm like, I've always done things at a turtle speed. If something new is coming around the corner, I just take we people in the East, we like to take our times. Everybody in the West is like in such a massive rush. And New York especially, like this place is madness. So I took my time. I came back and spent my time reading scripture. And I read all the 4 Gospels, and I fell in love with Christ. I did. He has been my love ever since.
It took me, I think it took me at least a month to start going to church. I went right back up to my Bible, right up to my dorm room, and then just started reading scripture. So then, how did you then come to? How did you get exposed to Calvinism, and how did you come to be persuaded by it?
Well, after that, I was, my schooling was done, so now I'm working. I had more extra time to like look up other things. That's when I like kind of started looking up like, the philosophy and finding out about all these. I'm like a bookworm. I devour books. So like every apologetic book that I could grab, like William Lane Craig's Blackwell's Companion for Natural Theology, some of his other books, Alvin Plantinga's books, J.P. Moreland, some of the others that I just like. I like reading, so I devoured those books. And then I wanted to really get into studying theology and systematic theology particularly. That's when I ran into theologians like R.C. Sproul is a theologian, D.A. Carson, you have John Piper, and others who are of the Reformed position. And yep, and I honestly have to say that I would have never naturally came to the Reformed position. It had to be taught to me. It had to be. I would have never, if natural progression would not, I just don't see myself just picking up the text and saying like, oh wow, I see Calvinist stuff in here. It had to be taught. And so once it was, right, the way that it's first, given to you, it makes sense. And that's why I, went through my cage stage where I wanted to tell everybody about it. and get everybody on board, and you should believe it too. But then I started running into these issues, and especially my mother and father-in-law I have a deep respect for, and I would say that if I was to just be able to give two people who really have exhibited the kind of love that Christ speaks about, it's them. So they have never given me bad advice. And whenever, after me and my husband got married, you have marital issues and whatnot, and honestly I have to say that mom and dad have been like the backbone to our marriage, that whenever we've had arguments and whatnot, they would sit us down, and they're very fair-minded. They're absolutely not biased towards him just because he's their son. If he's done something wrong, mom will tell him, like, you're wrong. And so they've always been very fair-minded. They can look past just he's our son, so we're going to take his side. They're not at all like that.
What did your when you a year and a half ago when you stopped subscribing to Calvinism, was your husband Calvinist? Were you married at that point? Was your Calvinist? Yeah. How did he deal with that?
I was married, but I was kind of studying theology, like kind of on my own. When I started, talking to him, he's like, no. He's like, I know the scriptures, and that doesn't sound like the portrait of God revealed in Jesus Christ. And I honestly have to say, even he, I couldn't figure out at first, why he wasn't seeing it. It's just, I really have to say, it's just the way that theology is taught, that you kind of draw a blank when people tell you that doesn't sound right. And so that's kind of where I was. And after I had this, pushback, and my, father and mom and dad, I just call them mom and dad now. We were having conversations, and they're like, no, that, and my dad outright said, he's like, if that is the portrait of God, and if that is who God really was, I would not worship him. I would walk away.
That's one thing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And that's really when they both said that, that's kind of that was my jaw drop moment. I'm like, I don't get it. Why? And I honestly had to sit back and meditate on it for a long time to for the switch to go off in my head. And that's when the cognitive dissonance and everything set in, and I started seeing the implications of it, and I couldn't make sense out of it. And I would say I was very close to walking away from my faith, because I started to have suicidal thoughts once again. It was a really time in my life.
Would you say that it's an interesting thing, because I hear a lot of times I'll hear Christians, when an atheist will speak about, or not, and sometimes these are really poor arguments on the part of the atheist, but the atheist will say, oh, your God's a moral monster or whatever, right? They'll throw that out there. And the Christians, to some degree, will say, well, are you going to judge God, right? You don't get to pick basically what reality is. So it's interesting to me when I hear Christians who reject Calvinism say, well, if that was the way God was, I wouldn't worship him, because I feel like I hear that argument so much go back the other way. And maybe I'm hearing it predominantly from Calvinists back the other way, but are you of that persuasion that if God was a certain way, you would let's say it was the reality that God is that way, would you, if you couldn't see it another way, would you opt to not worship.
Um, the
Does that make sense? That might not make sense.
Well, no, I understand what you're saying, that if indeed Calvinism was like 100% accurate and that was the truth and we knew that for sure, I would say, yeah, no, I would walk away.
But you found yourself there before, though.
Yes.
Like you were persuaded for a time that it was the case.
Yes.
But you just weren't thinking, do you think you weren't thinking through the ramifications of it? Is that what it is? Or
not just that, I wasn't even thinking that if this even is the truth. That's really where the issue was for me. That once I started having that disconnect, I was, very close to walking away. But then I was like, and then I had like this tug back, that you should look into history. And I started looking into history, and coming to Christianity in the West, by default, Protestantism, there's a deep-seated, almost like this like boundary that you can't go, or like you can't look past the 1500s, or like, oh, tread lightly if you look past the 1500s, the Great Reformation, because all roads lead to Rome, sort of thing.
Sure.
And being a Protestant,
Baldy's happy to hear that, by the way.
and Protestantism has this notion, this phobia of Rome that's just inherent, and it's taught to you, and you kind of just naturally pick up as you're in the tradition, that I thought I was going that route, like, oh, I don't want to go towards Rome, and but then
I'd argue that's evangelicals demonize Rome quite a bit. It's not just, it's kind of an evangelical. There's a lot of evangelical in America anyway. There's a lot of evangelical. What's the word? Distrust, or
yeah.
It almost wouldn't. You know what I'm saying anyway. Sorry, I'm sorry I interrupted you with a needless point. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was like, I'm gonna have to get over that and just start looking back into history, and that's when I, went back to the earlier centuries, found the writings of the early church fathers, and I became acquainted with Orthodoxy, and it's like almost like a light went off inside me that there's Christianity in the East, and it never really hit me until that point that, you know what? Yeah, Christianity is not a religion of the West. It's a religion of the East. Christianity was not born in the West. The West merely domesticated it. But Christianity was born in the East. It's an Eastern religion. And that's really when it kind of hit me that why would I take a Western understanding? And so I started looking into the Orthodox Church, into the Orthodox faith, and me having been born in the East, I would have to say that it's like, oh, I found home. And
that's interesting.
It just, that way of life, that way of looking at the Christian truths, that way of understanding God, it made sense to me because I am from the East.
Can I two things that you said that interested me. You said that you started having when you started having suicidal thoughts again. You said, and I think you were saying that was when you were coming to appreciate the consequences of a Calvinist view a bit. Do I have that right in terms of the timeline?
Yes.
Or the cognitive dissonance that you talked about?
Yeah.
I guess what is your interpretation of that? Is that these things are so dark that perhaps it's not that you need to have hope in there, that otherwise you have this depression can overtake you, or is it, or did it have anything to do, like, for instance, I don't want to press this too much because these are really personal things for you, but you had this experience of feeling this alleviation of these things, but then you felt them return a little bit. I'm wondering what your kind of how you see those two things together.
Well, what was really causing it, I would say, was that I could not make sense out of Christ. I really couldn't. When I really stepped back and I took the theology to its logical conclusions, and the portrait of Christ and the presence of Christ in my life that I felt, the person that I know, I couldn't make sense out of. And so, I mean, yes.
So all of a sudden you didn't know. All of a sudden you didn't know who it was that you had fit. You didn't know what the character of this person was, or what that being was to you. Is that?
No,
is that true?
It was more so that, yes, I acknowledge the fact that I can see how they arrive at the systematic of Calvinism, that there are scriptures. But then you have this other side, and the two just, I couldn't bring it together when I took the conclusions, just to the extreme, like where they would inevitably logically go if you just sit back and you just look at them. And that's really where it happened, that I just can't make sense. And I started having really dark thoughts. But I would say the cross of Christ is what pulled me back.
Yeah, I can empathize with that. My own coming to it, actually in the summer after I became a Christian, I actually believed, I wasn't a Calvinist, but that summer I read, I think I got a book at the local bookstore called Spurgeon's Sovereign Grace Sermons. And it was actually those that persuaded me on the issue. At first I was like, I actually didn't know that Spurgeon was a Calvinist. And I don't even think I knew what the Calvinist position was. And as I read it, it was almost like, as I'm reading, I'm going, wow, this stuff's really greatly written. This is really great stuff. But is he actually saying this? So it was actually very difficult at first to take on board, but I held it very much in the same way that I think Jimmy Stevens, who I think puts it as well as anyone, in my opinion. And depending on what your persuasion is, there's a lot of people who will take that different ways. But I think that there's a richness that I hear him conveying that I myself felt. It was never for me a struggle of it was everything was to God's glory, and so there wasn't this struggle to I didn't have a dark faith. Like, I didn't have this quality about my faith that that there was this inevitability and therefore I shouldn't act, or that it didn't elevate me in any way. If any way I felt like it had crushed me and actually made me, taken everything away from me. And so there was this really weird richness to me. So when I actually came to Google Plus and I saw all this discussion going on, because when I was a Christian, the internet wasn't this robust. And so there weren't these conversations going on. I mean, this is like 1992 or something, right? So I didn't have exposure to other people who were offering me other notions or anything like that. And I didn't even know that these, other than reading Spurgeon's own words about Arminianism or any of the other groups that he was battling at the time, I didn't know that those rifts existed. And so when I came to G+, I'm like, oh my gosh, look at what's going on here. Like, it's really interesting to me that I was telling my wife, I was like, I almost see more Calvinist, Arminian, or a non-Calvinist debate going on than actually Christian atheist discussion going on. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. So once it's because of the kind of impact that it's had, and I believe a very unnecessary impact, because when you dig back, like you know, I've been on my journey towards Orthodoxy. I've gone to a couple of liturgies now, but I have not been chrismated yet into the church and whatnot. But just going through and just studying history, studying it from that perspective, you come to find out that this is not at all what the Christians understood in the first, centuries. Nobody really understood the scriptures like this. And the very first person that you have somewhat of a pattern, similar pattern, is St. Augustine. And St. Augustine in the East, yes, he is a saint, but his writings and his influence is taken very mildly. Because of not only his background, but also the ideas that he was kind of, when he first converted, his writings had a different sort of feeling to it, but then you had the heresy of Pelagianism rise, and I think what tended to happen was that in order to combat this heresy, he went further than he needed to, or he should have. And I think his writings went to, like, the pendulum swung, and because he was trying to combat this, he just took it to the extreme. And the way in which also St. Augustine understood original sin is not how the East understands it. They don't hold to original sin as Rome would hold to it.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it made a lot more sense. And Orthodoxy is a very incarnational faith. It is very much, there's absolutely no duality at all. And it's very much focused on the person of Christ. That just like Christ said that, nobody can know the Father except they did go through me. And, even when Philip in the Gospels asked him, show us the Father. And Christ said, have I been with you so long that you do not know me?
Mm-hmm.
And so Orthodoxy from the very beginning has taken this position that the only way you can understand anything about God is if you can understand the person of Christ. If you can understand the personhood and the personage of Jesus Christ, you will understand God, whatever little is available for you to understand. But aside from him, no. Why Orthodoxy takes a very different approach to the Old Testament and stuff, that it has to be understood. Their theology is extremely Christocentric. That Christ is the epitome of everything.
But I assume that you'd agree that a Reformed theologian would probably make the same argument, right? They would say that theirs is rooted in the personhood of Christ, right?
I really don't think so. I don't think so, because if you really look at the system, it's like it's describing like, you know, God does whatever he wants. I honestly feel in Calvinism, Christ ends up being nothing more than a chess piece on the cosmic, in a cosmic chess game that's going on.
Sure.
He's
I think that's
merely
fair.
he's merely that chess piece to bring whoever God the Father was going to bring to salvation. I honestly, that's how I see it, because if you cannot divorce, like Orthodoxy does not divorce at all the character, the personage, everything about who God is understood through Christ's interaction with human beings. That he's the only way we can understand it. So how he approached other people, that's what God is like. And if it's not compatible with that, I mean, I honestly don't see how that's compatible with a God who just is damning people before they're even created.
Sure. In terms of, I think that's a completely fair critique in terms of that God as that Jesus becomes a chess piece in God's match, like that he becomes just the tool of God's glorification by demonstrating his love. And that anything that is the things that are necessarily juxtaposed against that are merely tools, like damned humans, right, become just an end to a means for God, right?
Yeah.
But isn't that it's hard for me? So a God who chooses to create, though, the things that he's creating are merely tools, are they not? They're how could like, I guess maybe what's your perspective on creation then? That God created with the intention of this being a lasting perfect state, or a lasting sinless state, and it happened to not go as planned? Or how do you take it then?
Well, we're gonna have to really get into philosophy first. One thing I will say, the Eastern mindset is very different than the West. As what I mean by that is this. This whole way of understanding God through Platonic Aristotelian logic, and you know, God is omni this, omni that. If you really think about that, all we have are theories of what omniscient or this looks like. The East has always taken the position that theology should be done organically, as in we cannot claim or presume to know more than what's been revealed. Yes, there's statements such as God knows things, but how that exactly works or what that even looks like, we have no clue. And so the approach to doing theology from the very earliest period in the Eastern mindset has been a very apathetic way of doing theology, is that we acknowledge what we has been revealed about God, but we don't make claims to know further than what has been. Like, it's only this much that we know. Other than that, it's all assumption.
That seems very similar to what I heard. I think Negation of P just had a hangout with Jimmy Stevens, and I only heard a little bit of it, but he actually made the same charge that God's, in terms of God's love and his expression of it through the fall and the saving act, that from a human standpoint, we make certain evaluations about that, but that it's an imperfect evaluation, that it's not a perfect understanding of it. So it seems it's similar in that he would say that you couldn't go beyond that in terms of knowing these things. And again, I'm not a Christian or a Calvinist, so I don't believe either of you.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because what you said just actually paralleled what I heard him saying, which is, look, if we're going to reject this, we're rejecting it because it doesn't make sense to us, and that's not good grounds for a rejection, which I think is bogus as well.
See, for me, after I had once I started, just learning about the Orthodox faith, for me it was no longer about like a cerebral satisfaction. For me, it was more so spiritual satisfaction. And if one thing Orthodoxy is, it's because of the kind of incarnational faith that it is not at all like, I gotta believe the right things. No, it is a way of life. And that's in the first century when Christianity first started. That's what people called Christians, the followers of the way.
Yeah,
and
I think
that goes back to what Christ said, that I am the way.
this is probably going to sound terrible, but I think you're actually hitting on. I think you're actually hitting on exactly the when my mind couldn't make sense of what my heart wanted to believe. I couldn't. That was the. They always talk about the sore at the top of your mouth that your tongue won't leave alone. That was like that. Like I couldn't let it go, and I had to kind of see where that thing was going to lead. And I couldn't get to the point where I shelved my mind for my heart, if that makes any sense. And not saying that you've shelved your mind.
No.
That's probably the worst way to put it. But
believe it or not, a lot of Western theologians tend to have that sort of an understanding of the East. But honestly, I don't see any other way of taking any other approach to it, because Christianity it was born in the East. It was not born in the West. And so the Eastern way, and me being from the East, and maybe that's, my bias on it, but the fact that it was an Eastern religion and the Eastern way of understanding it just makes sense to me. So it's not so much as shelving, I wouldn't say you're shelving your mind so much so as you are reorienting to the proper way. That's how I understand it.
Yeah, I think this goes beyond, for me, beyond the theological. I'm wrapping up a video this week on which is I complained on my Facebook about Premiere crashing. I was nearly done this video on determinism, free will, and compatibilism that I'm putting together. And for me, it's even after when I left Christianity, I'm still a determinist in that I don't know, like, to me, if there's a will that is being that's being exercised on my part, I don't know what determines what that will. So that will acts to actualize actions, right? So like I choose to do something, and if we're going to say that there's something that's an indeterminate, there's an indeterminate quality to that will, I don't know how is it a perfect coin flip, or is it completely random? Is it completely undetermined? I don't see how it can be. I think it has to be. There's a reason why it is the way it is, and that's where I get into not seeing it as simply the sum total of all causes. So for me, I end up with a deeper philosophical issue with any sense of I don't know what a radically free will, even like what that refers to. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I can certainly understand those issues. For me, it's just once I tasted that sort of, once I tasted the ancient faith, it's just so sweet that way of life makes sense to me.
How would you? And this I'm sincerely interested here. How would you say? How would you put it? How would you characterize the indetermined or non-determined part of you that is making decisions? Like, do you feel like? And I'm gonna try to set it up Do you feel like it's a part of you that has always existed, that is outside of the causal stream? What gives it its nature? Like, how do you see yourself? How do you see your will that is acting?
The way that I understand it is, the East takes the approach that we are body, mind, and body, soul, and spirit. That and scriptures alludes to this, that it's essentially the soul that really dies once you're separated. And this whole notion of being dead in your sins is understood as not as like, oh, right now you're dead. No, it's understood as separation. It's understood as a branch that was cut from a tree that will eventually wither and die.
Mm-hmm.
That's really how it's understood, the separation.
So, do you feel like your branch previously was this gets that weird, was connected eternally to that tree, or how did that branch come about?
I take the view that early theologian Saint Irenaeus did. Saint Irenaeus, when talking about the book of Genesis and the beginning of humanity, he pretty much says that humanity at that point was in its infancy, and Orthodoxy understands God's reason for creating human beings and creating creation as in sharing glory. It's not so much I gotta get glory, because God doesn't need anything. He's perfectly fine. He doesn't need anything from us. He merely wants to share it. So it's a desire. Having a desire and need is totally different thing. Like, he can't live without it, but God desired to freely share His glory and make creatures that would be able to participate in the life of the Godhead. And this is a different doctrine, not a different doctrine, but this is a different way of understanding salvation that the East has. They have a doctrine called theosis. I know Rome has I forget what it's called.
Deification.
Yes. So they have a notion of that's similar to that, and that's how salvation is understood. Salvation is not understood as merely escaping, getting your lottery ticket to heaven. It's understood as a drawing towards God and union with God.
How do you...
Welcome, everybody.
Go ahead, Bart.
Hello.
Oh, I was just... I'd put it to you in that message, Bart. I was going to ask you, Preet, how do you view intuition, and how does it play a role into what you're saying?
Can you elaborate?
Yeah, like like on your intuition of how you feel these things actually cohere, how these beliefs line up with some of your intuitions. Does that make it feel stronger for you, or feel like you're on the right track?
Do they make sense to me? Yeah, they make sense to me, and I don't have any conflict, if that's what you mean.
Does somebody else want to offer thoughts on that? Can I get this into a round robin a bit?
What was the question, sorry?
So, I guess, okay, so for my, maybe this will touch on Xbox's comment a little bit. I'm curious how people who don't take a deterministic view of things, how they see, like, for instance, Preet talked about depression, and that there are things that were she was subject to that she didn't feel like she could control, and found herself herself relieved of them when God acted, or when she conditionally changed in some way. These weren't things that she could freely kind of decide for herself, and so I'm wondering where, for those who see it as a radically free libertarian sense of will, not causally determined and outside of the causal chain, I'm genuinely curious. I'm not trying to bait or troll here. I'm genuinely curious how you view the nature of that, whatever that mechanism is. What determines? Is that simply a random number generator flipping a switch, A or B, or does it have something that is informing and determining the way that it is? If that makes sense.
If you're asking me how free will works, I have no idea. But that's been the affirmation since the beginning, is that, you know, man was created with freedom of choice, as in, and I really hate this notion that some people have, that if you have free will, as in you are making self-determinant like choices, that somehow you are overriding God. No, that we don't understand it that way. How it's understood is that in Him we move and we live and have our being. The very reason why we can have breath is because His sustenance. But that doesn't mean that you cannot determine for yourself some things. You're not acting outside. No, the reason why you are able to act freely is precisely because God has given that to you.
But when you talk about maybe this will frame it, is that when you talk about you are acting freely, what is the you that you're referring to? Because it seems to me that the you is itself a caused thing, right? Like I have all sorts of things that have accumulated to this moment where I'm articulating words to you that are the words that I'm articulating because of this entire past causal chain leading up to this moment. I don't have a separate thing out here going, okay, Bert's going to choose this word now, and this thing that's out here that's deciding that isn't in some radically free position where it can, outside of any cause dictating how it behaves, go, okay, he's going to use this word, he's going to use this word. Like it would have to have a reason for giving, even if I was to posit a separate entity apart from my will that isn't causally determined, that itself would have to be determined. It would have to have a reason for the way that it is.
The way now, this is another thing that's different in Orthodoxy, is understanding personhood, and the way that Eastern theology understands God is through that God is an essence, and His essence is unknowable. No human being can know it, His essence. God is only known through His energies. And that's how, and us being created in God's image, that's how we are. We are an essence, and we are energies. That the only way people can know us is through the impact that we make. That's our energies. But our essential essence, nobody can know.
So, but your essential essence, it was created, right?
Yeah.
And it has a given nature. Either it was created with the nature, or it came to have its nature through other things acting on it.
Yes, and this is something that Saint Ignatius speaks about. This Saint Irenaeus talks about that. That one of the earliest philosophical schools that they came up against was this idea that anything created is inherently evil, that it can't do otherwise, it has no will to do otherwise. That's something that they refuted from the get-go, that God did not create us so that by necessity we are doing something that when we're doing something that it follows that it's caused by necessity. No, you're choosing it. So, I mean, that was one of the first things that they came up against, and they said, no, this was not the understanding of the faith that we were given.
I'm not sure that they're mutually exclusive. If choosing and necessarily choosing, right?
No, I think there is a difference, because if you place necessity, you're gonna end up putting in fatality.
Right, but they're not. I'm just trying to make the point. I don't see them as mutually exclusive. They could be one way or the other, but they would still be.
So
I know Reformed theology, tries to appeal to a compatibilistic understanding of freedom and choice. I don't think that works. The reason being is, if you look at all the current philosophers who are compatibilists, none of them would take that position that what Calvinism is describing is indeed compatibilistic. The reason being is because you're adding in divine will. By de facto, immediately what you have is no longer compatibilism. You have divine predeterminism. You have faith.
I think this is, and this is part of my video, is there's a misunderstanding on compatibilism being compatibilism.
It doesn't work with Calvinism.
Well, no. I'm going to say it the other way. I'm going to say that for compatibilism to be the case, you would have to be able to say, yes, we are determined, and yes, we have free will. You would have to answer both of those questions yes all the time. And what it does is, in actuality, what compatibilism is a reframing of what free will entails. Mm-hmm. That it entails a choice between that you can deliberate upon courses of action, mm-hmm. and you can will to act, but that your will cannot be willed by you. That your will is causally determined. And so in that sense, compatibilism says, yes, you have free will, and by that we mean free will such as this that is determined. And that's how it's compatible. Otherwise, you just have either free will. If you say no, we're not determined, then compatibilism isn't compatible. It's incompatibilism.
But I don't think it works. I don't think Calvinism can claim compatibilism. The reason being is, what you're doing is not that you have this it doesn't work. You would have to assume a naturalistic framework for compatibilism.
From my understanding on it is Calvinist, and I'm not going to argue the Calvinist position, but that God's will is the will that is the causal determinant.
Well, pretty much. He's the only one doing anything in the universe. The rest are just carrying it out.
Right. Right, and I would have free will within that framework. The compatibilism, like Bert was describing, this would still, there wouldn't be necessarily an issue with it.
I don't see how that is. If by necessity you're doing something you wouldn't have done otherwise if that necessity wasn't there.
Yeah, but they're not describing free will as the ability to do otherwise.
Well, do you still have two choices?
Yeah, you would still have choices. Would you reword how you worded that, Bert, of how a compatibilist would take free will?
Yeah, the way that I like the way Schopenhauer put it. He said, and actually this is Einstein's paraphrasing, is that a man can act as he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. That you have that your will is, because otherwise, so here's how it is that if your will is not determined by something, then it's got an indeterminate nature. That is to say that there was nothing that made it such that it is. That's what you would have to believe to believe in radically free will of that nature. And so then the question is, why does it have the nature that it has? If it was created with that by God to have a nature for all time, such that Preet Wilson's will is what it is and is not impacted, then he would be the determinant, right? He would have determined the nature of your will such that it orients your decisions between A and B a certain way, that you actually make choices a certain way. Or it would have a nature that came about through other causes, but it has to have a way that it is for a reason for it to be the way it is. And so that's the compatibilism.
I think when you're still looking for that, like why do people do things they do, you're still assuming a deterministic framework. Your presupposition still is that you're looking for causal chains.
I'm looking for, so we believe that the will has a certain nature, right? Does it not? And so it has to have the nature by some means, right? It either has the nature because something gave it that nature, or it came to have that nature. But if it has a nature, there's a way that the nature came about, right?
Well, okay, here's another part that we're going to differ. The East differs quite a bit with the West in the understanding of sin, in the understanding of original sin.
I could take that. Like the thing is that I can. So I'm and this is something that I'll articulate again in my video. I'm going to be harping on a lot of things that I'm going to already say in that, but I don't have a problem with the determined nature, because ultimately that's what my choices mean. Like, I want them to actually be decided by something that has a reason that it is the way it is. It would be terrifying if it was indeterminate, right? Like if it was non-determined, what gave it the qualities such that it chooses this or that, right? Like, I think it's incoherent, because I think that if it has a nature, it has a nature for some reason for it to be, unless it was eternally that way, right? The only thing I see that could be non-determined would be God himself, right? Because God himself would have nothing that had determined what God is, but anything that comes subsequent would have to have some reason for the way it is.
Yeah, and otherwise I would have no distinction between drinking a cup of gasoline over a cup of Pepsi.
But I think, and I actually think that's a good thing, because I want to learn from my experiences, and I want to have my the qualities that make up me actually, and the people I surround myself with. I want parenting to be efficacious. I want all of these things to have some predictability, in the sense that they help. It helps with justice, right? Like I can give more police support to an area, or I can improve the educational system and have youth outreach and other things. And so these are great things. It's good that these things have a causal quality to them.
I understand that. What you're talking about is that the choices have influence, or like kind of like a ripple effect. Mm-hmm. But what I'm talking about is that when it comes to moral choices, when somebody does do that which is immoral, I honestly can't see how accountability comes into play if you don't have, you can perfectly, you can do A, you can choose to act or not act. It's like you can choose to act on that temptation, because another thing that wouldn't make sense is what Christ said, that when these temptations come, you are to resist from them. Yeah, so I think if you can't resist, then it makes no sense that you couldn't resist or give in.
I think reconciling this to any I think deistic notions become very tricky then at that point, and I completely agree with you on that. But in terms of that you could do otherwise, that you let's say you had the choice
to
either
not act is what
right.
I'm talking about.
Sure. So if you have the choice to act or not act, what is the thing that decides whether you do act or don't act, and what made it choose that versus something else? Is it if it's non-determined, that means that it has no reason to do one or the other, right?
I think you're using quite a bit of loaded language there, personally, Bert.
Okay.
It seems like you're framing the way you're saying it in a way that would more benefit your point of view rather than give a level playing field. Because what, and I don't mean it as a sort of a stab at you. I just mean it as, if we're going to
Sure.
talk about this, we should try and use neutral language. So if we're going to say, oh, 1 second, I'm being interrupted. I'm being told to keep my voice down, so never mind my opinions.
Bless you.
Oh no. All right. Let me see if I can not use the.
I still think I still think your presupposition is assuming a deterministic, because another thing is that I am of the position that we are not merely our bodies. We are a soul and a spirit in conjunction with a body.
No, that could be, because I do, and I think most of us do take a presupposition in here that we are not a separate thing from our decisions, or we're not separate from the rest of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think if you took this free will view like that, you would have to see that you were making decisions separately from the universe. You were making them independently.
Radically.
I don't see how that is.
No causal reason.
Well, you can have influences, sure, but the influences, it doesn't follow that just because you have these influences, they need to be the cause themselves. I mean, this is something I think we as a society admire very much, and we give much, like we aspire to inspire the next generation to overcome their circumstances.
Well,
That you are not a victim.
That I am my experience.
You're a victor.
Yeah, you are your experience, is what Xbox is saying. That's what I take it. So let me see if I can, instead of getting into communities and outreach and education, which are all things I loaded in, when I guess and I'm truly trying to understand. I want to understand how you see things. Let's say right now I won't. If I was to say right now that I won't agree, I still want to understand how you see it. And so so I'm not trying to use loaded terms. You have a will that is being posited as radically free. Does it have a reason for how it adjudicates a matter, like how it actually concludes a deliberation, or is it? It's not random, right?
Well, it's not random as in the person is making choices after they're delineating a choice after they're making rational choices. They are weighing their pros and cons and going through the whole rational thought process of making certain choices, but that's as far as I would go. That this goes back to understanding that the Eastern cultures hold that not cultures, but the Eastern theology holds insofar as Christianity, that we are essence and energies, as in our essence is that thing that is private, that even God has given it that liberty to exercise those choices where He's not causally doing something. You are genuinely making choices.
Sure. So the essence that's genuinely making choices, does it change with time? Does it have a? Is it? Does it?
Yeah.
So it improves. It has things that influence it from outside.
Yeah.
So it can be shaped by it.
Yeah.
But there's a core part of it, would you say, that acts as a larger proportion of the decision-making nature, such that these things that are shaping it and influencing it
at any given moment, the East has always held that at any given moment, when it comes to moral choices, doesn't matter who the person is, every single human being is able to either act and commit that immoral choice, or to restrain from committing that immoral choice. They can do it.
Sure. Sorry, go ahead.
How that happens, I don't know.
Go ahead,
I mean,
Mars.
that would have to really get into like you knowing somebody's essence, and that's really where it goes. That I mean, it's like you can only know me, Bert, by what I tell you. Though, like, you know, you can know my mannerisms, what I tell you about myself. That's the only thing you can know, is the animating part of me. But you can't know the essence of who I am, the I am that is inside.
So is this essence equivalent to like a spirit and so forth?
Yeah.
And if so, where does this reside within the body?
I would, well, see, this is where it gets into the metaphysics of it, and that's where it would be a guessing game.
So if I want to talk about the thinking process of people, if I poke certain parts of the brain, some parts of the brain are underdeveloped, damaged, people's thinking abilities, their faculties are lost. Some people do become more narcissistic, others become less empathetic, so on and so forth. So we know this is attached to the brain, and from that we can explain through basic chemistry, so on and so forth. So where to that neuroscience would you then fit in with this metaphysics kind of stuff?
Well, this is where Orthodoxy takes a different approach. I mean, Christianity, if you're looking for science, then you got to go to science. From the beginning, it's never been this issue of the understanding of God, and although it can inspire, you know, scientists who do have faith and whatnot, and it absolutely does because of creation, but that really is, I don't think even the scriptures are a science book.
Well, yeah, I mean, sure, these people could be have faith. That's all fine and dandy, but when I'm looking at the brain and we poke and prod it, we do proper experiments in it and have it published in neuroscience journals and so forth, we can then get an understanding of how models work, be it, you know, Drosophila, be it mouse models, monkey models, so on and so forth, primate models. So we do know that thought process, morality, all that can be tied back with the physical brain. And once you have that, why would you then, I know it's part of the faith and you have to go just by that, fair enough, but once you have that kind of understanding of how neuroscience reflects, you know, morality and how people interact, how their choices are affected and so forth, how would you then try and bring in this physical spirit aspect into that? If you want to say just on your faith, that's fair enough, but I mean, once you do have that science, you know, established, do you have a way to say, okay, well, that's where science says what it is, and you can't apply your faith to it, or?
No, we don't take a dualistic position that Eastern theology understands the soul, the spirit, and the body as intertwined. That it's not, it's knitted together. They go hand in hand with one another.
Okay.
If you want to find the soul, like, you know, examine it under a microscope, I don't
Yeah, fair
think
enough.
that's what.
Yeah,
But
fair enough.
as far as we understand the body, we put a very heavy emphasis. This is what I was talking about, that, you know, Orthodoxy takes the position of it is a very incarnational faith, as in it relies on the senses, the sense of smell, touch, eyes, like all of that, like everything that you take in with your senses, because your spirit and your soul are so intertwined, they are moved by it as well.
So
I think Larry was wanting to jump in there too, whenever.
just another quick follow-up. So if these things are intertwined, if I poke and prod the brain, or someone's had a car accident and they suffer brain damage, when they lose faculty, they can remember names of tools but not family, or they can just certain faculties lost when you damage the brain. So how would you then, if these are intertwined, would you then say, well, why doesn't the spirit or the soul then just take over that portion of the brain that's damaged or underdeveloped or something like
So
that?
that's what we're saying, is because they are so intertwined, it's not that the soul can, or this, you know, this the immaterial, if you want to call that, can just take over. No, it's affected as well. They are intertwined. It
So
can't
how would that affect?
overpower one the other.
So I take it then you believe in spirit, you know, after you die it rises off and so forth, off into heaven or you know. So if they can separate at death, when the whole thing's damaged, it's not working, it's unfunctioning,
Yeah.
the brain and the.
Yeah, but you have to realize that there's a reason why, you know, the Christian faith says that there is a resurrection. If the soul or the spirit could live on by itself, what's the point of having a resurrected body?
Well, when I was saying, you know, when you die and you think the spirit rises off, that's just to give the example that, you know, it can detach from the brain, but when you damage the brain, but you're still alive, you're
Hold on,
saying
Emmett.
that.
You might ask her what she thinks happens at that, because I don't think she
Oh
actually
yeah.
said on that.
So what do you think happens after death?
I'm still studying about Eastern theology on that notion. I believe my other Eastern brothers would have to fill me in on that. I'm not entirely sure. But the emphasis has always been that the human being, fullness of what it means to be a human being, the body is very much a part of it. You can't separate it.
All right. Thank you for that.
Do you want to jump in there, Larry? I think you had something to ask too. If we can't hear you, if you're.
Ozzy says, where in Scripture does it suggest that souls can be disembodied? I think in Christ's resurrection himself, like he does come into sort of a kind of a new body, so to speak, and the ascension. You could even look at that, and then the idea of you know, even in the Old Testament it says Enoch was, and then he wasn't. He walked with God and he wasn't, and Elijah is taken up to heaven in a chariot. There's kind of this imagery that something happens afterwards, you know. So those are a couple things that come to mind, just addressing Ozzy in the chat.
Yeah, give me a brief second. Larry's having an issue trying to get his. He was trying to talk while you started talking, but his mic isn't. He's either mute. It doesn't show you muted in here, but if you have a hardware mute. The other thing, and I'll quickly say it. Otherwise, I'll fill you in on the chat if this doesn't work. On the top, if you hit the little gear and switch your speakers, just even if it's already on them, switch it back to the default whatever speakers you're using and hit save. I mean on microphone, sorry, not speakers. On the microphone, switch it to the microphone you're using and hit save, and then see if that helps. If not, I'll try to work with you on the side chat and try to get it going. No, can't hear you. Okay. I'll try to work with him on the side chat if someone else wants to pick up.
I was trying to actually we can pick up with Ozzy's question, because he said Christ comes back physically, and Paul speaks of spiritual bodies as in bodies. So if anybody has a take on that. Oh, here's Dre. Sorry, Dre, I didn't see you in there.
Yeah, I'm just here to learn. Thank you guys for having me.
Sure. Okay. Sorry, let's try.
Yeah, no, I know your mind. Like you were trying to do 10 things at once at the same time.
Yeah, I'm like,
Yeah,
wait, me.
I was actually gonna say something. I didn't want to interrupt him, artist. But if you start making claims about reality, then you don't have to take the Bible as a scientific book, but where it makes claims about reality, we can investigate those things. So to make claims beyond that and say that these things are completely separate is hard for me to grasp. Not the claims you were making, because you weren't making any.
Yeah, no, I agree. If you're going to make a claim on something about neuroscience, well, then you'd have to use neuroscience to back it up.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, great. I don't know what was going on. This is kind of a ways back, but in the whole conversation about what determines what choices I make, maybe a question for Preet. By the way, Preet and I've never talked before, but we've corresponded a little bit on Google+, and generally we agree, but this is probably something where we may have some disagreement, and I'd be interested to hear her take on this. So if the decisions that I make, or I guess the question is, what determines, I think I'm on the same line of thinking, Bert, that you are. The decisions that I make are determined by something. And I guess my question is, as you look at Scripture, I know we've talked a lot about systems, and I'm all in favor of systems that help us organize our thinking, but I think sometimes we get tied so down to systems we don't look at, well, what does the Bible say? That's kind of the founding document for me as a Christian. What, from your perspective, Preet, does the Bible say is behind the decisions and choices I make?
I think when you're coming from the Protestant background, you would take a different understanding altogether about the way in which scriptures are to be understood in general, or see, from where I am now, from antiquity, the scriptures were not a thing on their own. Scriptures were given to the church, came through the church, and so, from the very earliest times, when encountering, heresies that came up and whatnot, that you really can't divorce Scripture by itself apart from the faith that was given to the saints, just as the Apostle James says, the faith that was once and for all delivered to the saints, to guard this faith. And so that really has been the mantle that has been passed on from generation to generation, taking that seriously, that we are to guard it and not let foreign ideas or anything reinterpret what was the understanding that was given to us. So when I read it in light of the rich tradition that the church has, I really don't see this idea of it's called like our choices. There is a part of us that, and I am perfectly fine with admitting that I don't know how to explain it, but there is a certain part of us that makes choices which are genuine. And how that happens, I can't say that I can explain it. And I don't think anybody could explain to me, you know, even if we take the Aristotelian or the Platonic notions of, like, you know, God is omnipotent. I mean, what does omnipotence even mean? We can come up with theories, but we don't know. You are assuming a lot in order to explain something like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I agree with you that I don't know is a good answer oftentimes. Probably ought to be used more often than we do. But I guess what I was getting at is, and I'm thinking of, and I know you and I would agree that while we might disagree at the influence of perhaps the modern church on understanding of the scripture, it sounds like, but you certainly wouldn't say that something the scripture says is incorrect. I heard you speak enough to probably safely conclude that, or seen you right enough to safely conclude that.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say that, you know, this part is altogether wrong. I would say that how that is to be understood should be in light of the apostolic faith which was passed on, the understanding as a whole that was given.
Yeah. So, well, let me ask specifically then the passages I have in mind. I didn't want to necessarily steer you in one direction or the other, but rather hear your answer. But I'll tell you what I had in mind is, you know, Scripture seems to say very clearly in several places that my nature has influence over what, and I think, Bert, that's what you were getting at. My nature has a strong influencing factor of what I decide to do and choices that I make. And then we read things like in Romans chapter 8 that, you know, if I'm unaffected by God, or the term that the New Testament would use is if I'm unregenerate or a non-spiritual or natural man, that I have an incapability of doing things that please God. And so it seems to put a limit on my choices, not necessarily forcing me to make any particular choice, but a limit on my choices by virtue of the fact there are certain things I'm incapable of. You know, and just like I'm incapable of jumping off of my roof and flying, it's not in my nature.
Yeah, no, see, this is where I would differ. This is where the understanding of, you know, the Orthodoxy understands the human condition through the notion that pre-existed, Augustine, ancestral sin, which is the understanding that our human nature, or what, well, actually it goes further than that. It has to go back even to the understanding of Genesis, and that I know in Western theology the understanding is that we went from this perfect state to this, like, really radically imperfect state, and now we need to be restored to a perfect state. Whereas Orthodoxy doesn't understand it that way. What it's been understood as, one of the more notable figures in the first century, first to mid-second, St. Irenaeus understood it, that it's not that we are being restored to an earlier state. What's happening is we are getting something even greater. And I'll to explain that, it's like this: that when humanity was in its infancy, And the church holds no dogma insofar as, oh, you got to take this literally, or you got to they don't take that position. The church gives the freedom to people how they want to understand it, but this is how it's understood. That when humanity was in its infancy, because God desired that love is reiterated over and over in the New Testament, and Christ more so. I mean, Christ, it was the apostles more so that spoke about grace, whereas Christ always spoke about love. And love, and as Apostle Paul says, you know, now let faith, hope, and love abide, but the greatest among these is love. And in order for love to be the very epitome of what union and what communion means, that you have to have genuine choice. And because we are made in the image of God, the triune Godhead, there is synergy in the Godhead, that the Father genuinely loves the Son genuinely loves the Father. There's not necessity. There is this, I want to love you. And that's how they understand it. And we are made in His image, and that's why we are relational beings. We are synergistic by nature. We can only relate to one another as a give and take, as you know, genuinely being able to. So this whole notion of like necessity and like you can't or you can't, we don't think about it in that terms. So
I was just going to throw in there. I was just going to say,
go ahead. Sorry.
Preet, you and I, when we talk about this subject, it seems like we disagree a lot, but we are so close in how we look at that. The things you just said about the image of God in us, and the centrality of love, and you know, the whole fact that we were created in God's image, being
well, I think where you and I would differ, however, is that how we understand, you know, the first sin, where I think Western theology, not so much as for Rome, I think Protestantism, Calvinism more so, takes this dramatic that somehow sin had the power to undo what God did radically. And that's something that Orthodoxy will, from the beginning, has disputed, that there was nothing that could totally undo His work, undo that sort of like this is how we were to function, so to speak, because that is the only way we could come into a perfect union with God, is because of that essential nature in us being able to synergistically. Synergy is our very fabric, how we relate in society, relate to other people. That was never undone. What Saint Irenaeus said, that man was given a choice to either move towards God and achieve perfect union with God through obedience to God, or he was given the choice to move away from God. And they were created neither perfect, neither imperfect. They were created good, and so they could do either or. They could move close to Him or away from Him, and that's how it's understood. That
Can I ask on that, Preet? Like, and maybe you answered it earlier and I just missed it. Maybe I just need it reworded or something. But where does the notion of being able to make choices as a separate thing, like I have choice to move towards God or move away from God, but I make that choice separate from my influences. Like,
well, we don't take influence out of it. It's just that influence. You are not your influences. You can take in This goes back to the idea, you know, when Christ said, it's not what goes inside of you that defiles you, it's what comes out of you is that which defiles you. So the determining factor, if you, I would say, is not your influences. You are not bound to them. You can take them in and evaluate your choices in light of them, but they are not the determining factor themselves. You are the one that's making choices.
But you are saying there is something there besides my experiences that are helping in this process, right?
Well, yeah, I would say that influences are certainly a part of it, but if you want to attach causality to them, that's where I would differ from you. You are not bound to them. You don't have to succumb to them, is what I'm saying.
Right on. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think I understand you. Obviously, I don't agree with the Rajagadan, but I think I'm getting a better understanding of what you're saying.
I mean, I'll give you an example. For example, if you have a married man and he finds himself in a situation where a strange woman or a woman who is not his wife is, let's say, naked in front of him, his body will react. He'll get aroused. He might get an erection. But whether or not he chooses to commit adultery and go through with it, that is not necessitated upon the reaction that his body feels. He can say no to that temptation.
Well,
yeah. I would still tie that to a causal change of his experiences and what type of person has made him who he is. But I see what you're saying completely.
Yes, but there is a self-formation in that that happens as we grow up, is what I'm saying, is as a person grows up, as we're making choices, as we're taking in different influences, we are in a way shaping ourselves.
But I guess my again, we just go round and round here, so I'm trying to put it in different terms. It seems like you're saying that we're inclined to do certain things, and that the inclination to do something is fed by two things. It's fed by the causal determinants, and then it's caused by the you that is making the decision. So that there are causal qualities that can play a role, like they can inform you, but that ultimately there's something that's free of that cause that can go, you know what, I don't want to do that. I want to do this instead. And so I think what I'm trying to dig at is, what is that thing that's saying, I want to do...
And that's what I would say is where we would take the position that is the image of God in you, that you recognize that, you know, though my flesh, and I'm going to use biblical terms for this, though my flesh wants to act upon this, there is a part that I don't have to give into it. Right. I can either say yes, or I can withhold and say, no, I don't want to go through with this.
But that part of you that is the, well, I could say yes, or maybe I go this way, or, you know, I don't have to do this. I'm going to do this instead. There has to be something informing, there has to be some root cause for the way that thing is. Like there has to be, and I don't mean to use cause, but I can't find another way to say it. If you're saying it has a nature, it hasn't existed eternally, such that it's always been that way. So there's a way that it came to be the way that it is.
Well, that's where the East takes a very radically different position than the West, insofar as, you know, how much has sin affected us. Where the East understands it as sin, like insofar as Adam and Eve is concerned. Adam and Eve died, became mortal, because they sinned. But the reason why everybody after Adam and Eve sins is because we've died, because we're mortal. We don't die because we sin. We sin because we have died, as in we're mortal.
So let's say for Adam and Eve, they had temptation of the serpent. They had other things that were at play. Maybe they were curious. They had some they have these things that are inclining them to act one way or another. These external causal qualities that we're saying are not the ultimate determinant. They can play a role, right? Is what you're saying, but that they're not the final determinant, and that there's a inner voice that they can exercise that adjudicates the matter, that goes, okay, I'm not going to listen to these causal influences. I'm going to do what I know is right. But that inner voice, that inner inner bit has to have some means by which it operates, right? Like it's not a completely like could be A or B. It's got a bias to it. It has a certain I'm going to do the right thing, right? Like you said that it has the nature of God in it, or the quality that if they have that union, that they're inclined to do things a certain way. But they didn't author that, right? Like it was given to them, or it existed by some means. And so what I'm trying to dig at is, what is the means by which that came to exist, that thing that adjudicates the decision, and how is that not out of their power to decide? Like how there's the will that is willed, essentially. You know what I mean?
If I'm understanding you correctly, that is the part that I would say that is the image of God in us. That because we are made in His image, and God does have liberty. He has the freedom to do things and not do things, and is precisely the reason why we are able to have that ability as well, because we're made in His image.
Does that not kind of seem like you're saying our free will is determined?
No. Why would it be? Is God's determined?
No, not God's. Ours would be, right? Like God is determining our free will for us.
No.
It's the same way, actually. It's the same between, like, there are certain, like, we're different from other species, right? So different species have different mechanisms that they operate under, and some, like a squirrel, run out into the road and then decide, like, it's going to cross and actually come back and get hit by the car when it sees the car or whatever. Or different animals behave differently. They have different inclinations. There are certain animals that are more docile, and we can get closer with, we can have a relationship with, and there are others that we know we can't because they're apt to do something radical. So there are differences in the way that we are. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, what is the difference about a human, an Adam and Eve that's adjudicating a matter? Where did that decision-making quality that helps them to go, you know what, I'm not going to eat that. That's bad for me. That's outside of being created or anything. How is that?
Well, this is where the ancient faith takes a different position as well. That I think this is, I don't know insofar as Rome where it stands on this, but as far as the ancestral couple, or however you want to understand it, because there's absolutely liberty how you want to understand that. That humanity, essentially how Saint Irenaeus described it in first century, was that humanity was in its infancy, as in it understood, but yet there was part of it that was premature, that it didn't understand. And I'm forgetting how he exactly described it. That it's not really seen as this dramatic thing that the West seems to give to it. That the Western understanding of it is that it was more so of like disobeying God, and so like offending God, whereas the East looks at it as breaking of a communion. It's a relationship that essentially severed, and that now what needs to not be done is that God is somehow offended. That no, God is wants to come back into communion and bring back into union. When it comes to like how they made their choice and all that, I'll say I don't know. That really we would really have to understand what essential personhood, what being a person really means. If being created in the image of God, what that exactly means. And theologians have been trying to speculate on that for centuries.
Thanks
how
for
that works.
I just want to thank Preet for being extremely generous in I've asked that question about 14 different ways. So thank you for giving each time the effort. I think MM Artist actually wanted to ask something.
Cliff. Yeah, Cliff did.
Yeah, there was a with Bert. You're forgetting though, Adam and Eve, they didn't know right from wrong before they ate and got original sin and so forth. So they weren't even able to have a rational thought to make a judgment on something.
Well, this is where Orthodoxy does differ from the theologians in the first century took that into account, and they battled with that, and that's why they from the Jewish Christian, because most of the early converts were Jewish. That's how they understood that was humanity at that point was in its premature state. It had to grow.
But even still, I mean, so how does Orthodox disagree, disagree with the statement that Adam and Eve didn't know right from wrong in the first place to make a rational decision?
Well, they didn't know right from wrong. No, they. What the fathers would say is that they knew what God had said, and that what God was saying was right. What they didn't what they yet had to experience was the consequences. Is what they didn't know.
Yeah, but I mean, like, if God says one thing, and then a serpent or someone else, say old Joe, right, says something else, but they don't know right from wrong, this God that created them, and they then think, oh, he must be trustworthy, better do what he says, but then someone else comes along and says something different, and if they don't know right from wrong, they can't evaluate the two claims made, and they'll just go with almost who they trust more.
That's where I would differ. That given if we're now going to take the text into consideration, that the question was posed by the serpent, did God really say? And Eve did respond that yes, that's what God said.
Yeah.
But the lie that he used was something that they would have eventually already had they not gone that route, is what I'm saying, is that what the serpent essentially promised them was godhood, that you shall be like God. But that was something that is the purpose of the human being. We are to be like him, and that they would have had nevertheless.
I got a question, if I may. When you read the Bible, how do you differentiate what is to be taken factually and what is to be taken allegorical or analogously? That's not good.
Well, I'm still making my way through all the ancient authors and how they understood it, but I think you have to take into consideration the kind of genre the text is. I mean, Genesis, nobody will deny it. It's Hebraic poetry.
Well, this is kind of why I was asking you about intuitions when I first asked you is if does this all have appealing nature to it because of like intuitions that you have, and they seem to line up with these? Or do you have a more substantial reason for this particular version of faith?
Well, I would say that Christianity in general, or this version of Christianity, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, this version of Christianity.
Okay, as far as this version of Christianity, my reason is simply because it's ancient. As in, this is what Christianity was. It was born in the East. It is the religion of the East. It's not the religion of the West. It came to the West. So, because this has been the ancient, antiquitous faith, to understand it in light of that makes more sense to me.
Right on. Yeah, that answered my question completely. Yeah, thank you. I don't think that diminishes it by any means. I just wanted to know. Just curious.
I'm still a little bit fuzzy on how do you differentiate, though, because I've been listening to you for a while, and I hear you saying things like you think that Genesis is kind of to be taken literally, but at the same time, I can't help but notice that, that it doesn't seem to be taken in the literal way that the way you describe it doesn't sound very literal.
Well, it wasn't taken literally. If you're asking what was the historical position, Origen in the 2nd century, I think he was mid 2nd to 3rd century. Origen said that that's not. If you're taking and applying a wooden literal hermeneutics to it, that's asinine. What it was understood is the spiritual principle of it.
I mean, I've always had a problem with Genesis, with the whole Adam and Eve thing, because, much like what MMA was saying, is that effectively it's being suggested that, Adam and Eve understood concept before they existed, death and sin. If they didn't exist before they ate of the fruit, then how can they know it's wrong? How can you, if I put you in a room full of plushy toys, and some of them you recognize and some of them you don't recognize, and say you can touch anyone you want, but don't touch the snuggle frump.
Well, this is why the Eastern theologians take the position that humanity at that point was in its infancy. As in, if you were to tell somebody who, like a child who is not, I'm not talking about like a little baby, I'm talking about a more mature child who is able to understand words and is able to understand, like mom said not to do this. He understands that I shouldn't do this. But yet, if he still does it, he knows that he's doing contrary to what mom said not to do.
But it's the why. I mean, the whole point of it is the learning. It's the, we learn these faculties by doing something and discovering why something is wrong.
That's exactly the point. That's why the Eastern theologians take that position, is that Adam and Eve had to learn. Now, the choice, they understood, just like I would say that, if a child was to understand that, dad said not to do this, so I'm going to listen to dad, or, you, in their immaturity or whatnot, that again has to, we go back to this notion of, why people make the choices that they make. Ultimately, Eastern theology holds that they are not, we are not victims to our influences. We are not victims. We can overcome, because precisely that wouldn't make sense if something is good by necessity or something is bad by necessity.
It doesn't seem like you learn why defying God is wrong, just that defying God is wrong.
Right. Can I offer that I think this is along those same lines, Xbox, is that Adam and Eve didn't have to, didn't start off walking on their hands, right, and then realize, oh, I should walk on my feet. Like they had certain dispositions or inclinations based on their form to behave a certain way, right? Like they didn't do trial and error for how to walk, for instance. So why is it? How is it that, or to talk for that matter, like they understood speech, they understood God, they had faculties provided to them that kick-started them and jump-started them into life, and so did they have a faculty for evaluating right and wrong? For instance,
they were certainly rational, if that's what you're asking.
I'm asking how. The nature that they had, unfortunately, I'm asking like for the 15th time now the same question. I apologize for that, okay. but it comes down to the same thing of they have a faculty for making decisions and rendering judgments, and we're saying that it's not entirely causally determined. That it has a nature that was not caused to such that it adjudicates one way versus the other. How did they come by that?
If you're saying the nature was not, what's the cause of our nature? Well, our nature is an endowment of God. And the nature, if we break the human person down to like bare bones, kind of, just using that language, the image of God is in every human being. And that image of God was never, it was, how it's understood is that because of the disunion that happened.
You wouldn't say that the image of God was the one that chose to eat and disobey, right? I'm assuming.
I mean the image of God, that ability to make choices, that is an endowment from God, that we are able to make those choices. We are able to self-determine those choices.
Right, that's the mechanism that you have to make the choice, but the content in terms of how it delivers a choice or how it renders a choice, they had a inclination, right? They were inclined to obey God, or they chose to not.
I think you're still stuck. And I think this is where you and I would have to reach like sort of an impasse, because
Sure.
The Eastern theology doesn't look at it as essentially when it boils down to personhood, and when it comes to the endowment of that image that God has given us, how we delineate things and whatnot. It's essentially a mystery. You would have to understand what essence really means in order to comprehend how it functions. That and that is something we would say that's like, now you come to like the edge, and then beyond this is just like us shooting in the dark, so to speak.
Can I ask a question that Ozzy asked earlier that I didn't get a chance to ask? He said, and it's along these same lines, he said, how would Preet determine if she's making free choices as opposed to having her choices causally determined? So how do you know when you're making a free choice versus one that is caused by the determinate factors that you're saying can play a role in it?
You mean that, like, my environment? Is that what you're talking about?
So we're saying that there are. You've said that causes can play a part in it, that influences can play a part in it. And how do you know? How do you know when an influence has played a part in your rendering decision, and when a decision has been made by the free part, the undetermined part?
Well, the rendering of the choice, making of that choice, conclusion is always you. But you can take into consideration, I mean, you're free to choose like I'm going to take this into consideration, that into consideration. You can delineate and rationalize all these different all this knowledge that you have, all this resources or whatever you want to call them, but the choice itself, the delineation, the ultimate would be you coming to that.
Yeah, I think the way that if we were to put that into the pool table analogy, the way I would understand that would be that I can hit the ball a certain way, and it could go that way, but as well it could go any other way, right? Like all of a sudden it becomes, well, it's not really these
well,
things.
No, the pool table analogy, what I would say is you as an agent, as a person, would evaluate, well, that ball's over there. If I hit it from here, I think it makes sense. Maybe I can, score, or maybe that one looks good. Like you have all these choices. You have all these. You're rationalizing, but then you take all that into consideration, and then you make your choice. You are the one taking into account all this knowledge that's in front of you about the various possibilities, and then you exercise based on however you delineate.
But why one choice over another? Like, how do I decide that? How do I decide?
That's where I would say that is where it comes down to. That is something that we don't claim to say that we understand that, or we say that has to be caused outside of you. You are making that choice.
Well, yeah, I'm deliberating internally about that choice through but I would say I deliberate eternally on my experience, my what I know about physics, what I know about the way things work, through that.
Yeah, but they don't have to be the cause for your when it comes to whether you like ice cream, what kind of ice cream you like or not. Yeah, that can be, whatever floats your taste buds. But what I'm talking about is when it comes to moral choices, and if we're talking about things such as accountability, moral responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
That choice has always been understood as the person is the one ultimately responsible.
Yeah, that's I think just where we stop the chain. I personally don't necessarily see that disappears in a determined universe either, but.
Well, it does, because then the reason why we take that position is that you become ultimately a victim to your circumstances or your influences. And once again, because Orthodoxy takes a very Christocentric approach, that goes back to what Christ said, that it is not what goes inside of you, and that's not understood as like you eating something, or that has a deeper meaning to it, that it is not what you intake by mind, heart, any of that. It is essentially what comes out. Now, the question that you guys are asking is how that coming out happens, and that's what I would say is I don't think anybody understands that.
I think I'm asking. I'm not sure where this extra bit of, because I had asked earlier about seeing. I think we see it differently, of being separate from everything else in the universe, kind of thing, and making decisions separately from this.
And that's where I think the divide comes in, is because I don't hold the position that we are merely our bodies, just reacting to things. No, there is the image of God, the essence that is inside of us, the spirit, the soul, and how they are interacting. That is where the mystery is, and that I don't claim to know how that functions, but that's something that God has given us to be able, because we're made in His image, to be able to exercise moral choices. That's the only way it makes sense that we would be accountable.
Can I ask a question on that? Because
Right
I've
on.
heard you say made in His image a lot. Do you think that Genesis is analogous, so that we're susceptible to guilt and rage and anger and love, hence the made in His image ideas?
So how that's understood is that theologians for centuries have understood that as us being rational, us being emotional, because God is emotional. He is rational, He's emotional, and He's able to make choices. And that's how we, how made in His image, the Imago Dei is understood, that we are rational and we are emotional. And we make choices according to, we take both of those aspects of us into consideration.
What about guilt?
Does God feel guilt? I don't think so.
I mean, what about after the flood? He said, "Yeah, I'm not going to do that again."
Oh, you mean the regret part of it? Yes.
Regret and guilt are somewhat the same thing, aren't they? Really?
No, they're not.
No, I don't think guilt and regret are the same thing.
Yeah, I mean,
necessarily.
if I shoot someone, I'm going to feel both regret and guilt. It's synonymous.
No, it's not. So I could regret doing something good, even. That's possible. But I wouldn't feel guilty for doing something good. I think that's different.
Unlikely.
Well, that's how it's understood, is that, and I know that there is a part of Western theology that tends to take those kinds of expressions and use I can never pronounce this word.
Anthropomorphize.
Yes, and we don't take that view. We believe God. Well, this goes back to the Christocentric bit, that humanity has always been dealing with God in the person of Christ.
Just a quick question. Oh, if you need to follow up, do so.
I was just going to say, do you think God introduced guilt? Wanted guilt to be introduced?
No, guilt is a...
Sorry, did I say guilt? Sorry, sin. Sorry, I meant sin. Sorry. I don't know why I said guilt.
Well, what sin is that?
Do you think God wanted sin to come into the world?
No. We take the view that God wanted to have union with humanity, but that union needed to be a genuine love for one another. And sin is sin, or evil, is not understood as having a substantive quality. It is the undoing of that which is good.
I just wanted to
it doesn't have a creative property.
Wouldn't you agree, though, that some shame or some conviction or some guilt could have a positive impact and maybe cause you to maybe reroute or cultivate oneself to avoid such things?
It's a growth of personality, I would say. I did something wrong, I learned from that experience, don't do it again, those sorts of things. That allows people to grow. I mean, I look at Genesis and I can come up to no other conclusion that God wanted Adam and Eve. He set them up to fail. That He created this tree and fruit that might not be eaten, and He put the serpent there and allowed the serpent to talk, and things like that. If He's omniscient, He would know these things are going to happen. He would know that Adam and Eve would sin, by not doing what they were told.
That's where we would differ in respect to Western understanding of God. That's where we don't take the Platonic understanding. That what does omniscient even mean?
It means knowing, all knowing.
How does that work?
So he knows everything before it happens, and has happened, and will happen, and so on and so forth.
Put simply, I think it means that the way that I see it is that he can appreciate the consequence of his actions. And when he acts when he acts in a given way, it's going to behave a certain way because he is the establisher of both the act and the rules by which the act will behave. So I see it as being a causal chain. For myself. Sorry, just one second. For myself, the way I see it is the reason why it was really hard for me is that God would have to eternally know that he was going to withhold knowledge or something. That's why I have a problem with this notion of God voluntarily withholding his ability to know. He would have to be exist that way, that would be a unique circumstance that he would hold back the appreciation of his the consequence of his actions. Either he can predict his actions and his actions have predictable outcomes that he is aware of for all time, or God isn't able to predict the consequence of his actions, which doesn't make sense to me.
But that's the perspective that we would say that we are not privy to that information. And I just saw Spackle mention that I sound like an open theist, and a lot of Orthodox, a lot of Orthodox would, because we would say that we don't know essentially how omniscient, what omniscient even means. I think they're theories, and to attribute to God that God is omniscient, God is omni this, omni that. The perspective that we take is that though they sound wonderful, they sound like you're really exalting God, but what those mean, we have no idea. We can only guess. And when you have things such as when we see how Christ was and the things he said.
What is an open theist? I don't know what that means.
Huh?
What is an open theist? I'm not familiar with that phrase.
That God, if I'm understanding open theism right, Spackle can correct me.
Open-minded.
They would say that God doesn't know some things.
It's that God.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead, Spackle, if you want to go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, I'm probably going to do it an injustice because I only know it. It's essentially that God. I've seen it articulated two different ways, and one of them is that God withholds knowledge of events. That when it came to creation, that God has knowledge of the potentialities, but not the actualities for the future.
And that way, you are allowed to choose more freely, right? There's no excuse of him predetermining every move that you make and things like that. I don't know. Right. I don't know if I subscribe to open theism or not. I find it kind of confusing, but it kind of hinted towards that. But Eastern Orthodoxy is all about. I'm echoing Xbox. Eastern Orthodoxy is all about the mysteries of God. And I'm gonna.
Yeah, we would say that is a property of God that we have not been told how it functions or what exactly that means. As far as agreeing with, I think we would agree with open theism insofar as God is able to withhold. He would have to, because if we go to Scripture, when God said to Moses that if I were to show myself, you'd get wrecked. You would get obliterated if I was to really show you what I'm like. Yeah. So God is able to withhold. He has to withhold in order for us to exist.
But
there's an image of God that I think kind of makes a lot of sense. That if you look at the holiness of God as bleach, right, and that he deliberately withholds some of himself from us because we're like mold, like essentially, and that it will just eat us away. And there's this idea that when it speaks of his holy fire and stuff like that, that it would have that kind of effect on us, and so that he partially holds back from us for our own good.
Well, we don't take the perspective that you know how Jonathan Edwards, for example, would or Martin Luther would take the perspective, and that really has to do with their understanding of how much sin. It's like Jonathan Edwards and Martin Luther, because human beings are so sinful that God can't even look upon us. And we don't take that perspective at all. That because we are like pretty much worms, that God can't. No, we take the position that He does look upon us.
So,
have you read the Tozer? Real quick, I'll just wrap it up real quick. There's a Tozer quote that says, "God will not hold us responsible to understand the mysteries of election, predestination, and divine sovereignty. The best and safest way to deal with these truths is to raise our eyes to God in deepest reverence and say, 'O Lord, Thou knowest. Those things belong to the deep and mysterious, profound of God's omniscience. Prying into them may make us good theologians, but it will never make us saints.'" And I always kind of think of that, like when we get into these like battles about trying to figure it all out. But that's just where I'm at.
Well, and I love A.W. Tozer, and I think Orthodoxy resonates a lot with what he said right there. That there are some things, and even Scripture says this, that the things which He has blatantly made apparent, those are for us to hold on to and know. But there are things that are just beyond us. That lest that perfect union happen, which will happen at the end of the age, we will not understand. And there will still yet be part of God that we will not know, and that's God's essence. God's essence is by definition unknowable, can't be known.
So again, a quick question. You've been caught saying before that you think Genesis is poetic and that it wasn't meant to be taken literally, and so on and so forth. I agree to that. So, but now you're talking about Genesis as if it's actually happened, that it's established. What's the go there?
Well, I would say that we understand it as in principle.
But do you take Adam and Eve to be literal?
No, I don't hold a view whether they're literal or not. Doesn't.
See, I always have a problem with I hear that, because if Adam and Eve are not real, analogous, allegorical stories, then what's the point in Jesus?
Yeah, you don't have original sin.
That there was some sort of real.
Well,
severing.
Humanity is what's represented there.
That there's a real severing between relationship with God, right? And that's what it's for. It doesn't necessarily have to be verbatim like a talking snake, but that there was a real severance between being in relation with God and not. And that what's confusing for people is when people go, you just take it as allegory, that can be, or literal, and you divide it up kind of in these categories. I think people don't think that you can apply allegory. It's just now a nice story that you go, oh, that's nice, but there's no application to it. But there's an idea that it's if it's not literal Adam and Eve, that it can represent humanity.
The meta-narrative is what we take into consideration. The meta-narrative.
Well, if it's just human nature, well, then that's just it. You can't really get out of it. So it's almost a bit of a cheap scapegoat.
I don't know what that means. What do you mean?
Scapegoat is normally how you, like Jesus is the scapegoat for wrongdoing.
You're saying it's a cheap way to put something on something, that it ends up being a kind of a vague attribution, essentially.
Yeah,
Well, then this also has to go with the Western. See, the Eastern theology differs so much with Western notion of what the incarnation even means. Like when it comes to Western theology, Jesus's death and crucifixion is looked at as like, oh, he's being punished by God the Father, and for what we did. And we don't look at the atonement like that. We don't look at the incarnation like that. The fathers, since the very beginning, have said that even if Adam and Eve, even if humanity had not gone the other route, but had stayed in communion, we were not created in union with God. We were created in communion for the purpose of union. That if they had stayed, even if they had stayed in communion with God, Jesus still would have been incarnated, regardless.
Do you have Eastern ways of viewing, say, the belief in Christ that he calls for in, say, like in John, for instance, or like it feels like to me like this is applying a lot to how we understand kind of the origins of sin, but does that follow through to vagaries in terms of how you understand redemption? Is that a mystery and atonement in a mystery such that anybody could be saved?
It stems from that notion. It has to go with how you even understand what exactly happened. Like the incarnation has a very glorious image in Orthodoxy. What incarnation and the atonement of Christ is looked at is as a rescuing or a calling back to God. It is not looked at as like the incarnation of Christ and his death is not looked at as God just needed a body to kill. We don't look at it like that. That the understanding of it is a lot more than that image of a. We don't take. If I was to sum it up, we don't look at the incarnation and the atonement in strictly juridical terms.
See, I always have problems with this because I can sort of understand a social, a cultural context to the idea of blood sacrifice. You say X amount, you got to sacrifice X animals, and things like that. So the animal sacrifice is quite common with the Judaism of the time. But the human sacrifice is something that goes back to, the Canaanites and things of that nature. And for me, it just sounds...
well, let me explain.
It sounds wrong because God is this all-powerful being. Why couldn't God just forgive everybody?
Well, that's a legit question. What the fathers said, what the Holy Fathers say, that the primary reason or the primary fix that needed to happen was death. That our sin is brought on by our mortality. And so mortality is what needed to be dealt with in order to deal with sin.
Why?
And that goes back to the understanding that Adam and Eve died. They became mortal because the glory was lifted, because they sinned, because they disobeyed. But we sin because we are mortal.
But and this goes to the video I think you actually responded to a little bit ago about God hating robots, is that you are going to be changed, or you believe you've changed. such that you won't sin in the future. So God is capable of creating states of affairs where his former creation will no longer sin. So why doesn't he just do that for everyone right now and we can move on?
Well, that's something we would say that's left up to the mind of God. We don't know. What we do know is that humanity was created in communion with him, with the purpose of a union. Union is altogether looked at differently than communion. Union is a lot more intimate. And that's something that humanity, by choice, through love, would go towards God. So the understanding that of the atonement and the incarnation is beautifully described by the Holy Fathers. They said that the only way to undo mortality was if the immortal put on mortality, and the immortal part of Christ was the hook that death swallowed, and it could not hold because of his immortality. That it could not hold it; it had no power over it because of his divinity. That is what conquered. The death is what needed to be undone, and that is what opens the way for union with God.
On that note, because we could go on seemingly beating this dead horse for a long time, but no, actually not this one. This was a fresh new horse, but I'm sure we could beat this one for just as long. I did want to.
I'm glad you clarified it was the topic and you weren't talking about Preet, because that would be incredibly rude.
Preet, you've been incredibly patient. I was hoping actually that some of your fellow Christians were going to chime in, and but they did in the chat and whatnot, so I appreciate that. But you took every question and were very gracious with your responses, and I appreciate you not getting frustrated, which anyone easily could have.
No, not
anybody easily could have, getting 20 of the same question over and over and over again. So I appreciate it, and I really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit and getting to hear about your background. I think that's great, and I'm glad that you were able to share that with us, because I think every post I read of someone who's shared their backstory, I read the posts completely differently now, and I really appreciate getting to know that a little bit about you. So.
Well, I was very happy to do this, and I'm always open to having, like, I will say that I have done a complete 180 from, when I was a Protestant, and going from the Western notion of thinking. When you go to the East, unfortunately, for us, Christianity is no longer a cerebral religion. It is a religion of the heart, for the mere fact that, this hits on the very notion what Christ said, that I've come, that he will give you a new heart. He didn't say I'll give you a new mind. He said I'll give you a new heart. And so that's really what the Eastern theology is really honing in on, is that part of what it means to be human, is that it's a heart, it's a way of changing the heart, not so much as the mind will follow if the heart changes.
I thank you to all of the panelists who joined, and Larry and Spackle and others who came and went. And thank you all, and everybody have a great weekend, and take care.